And welcome everyone to Keeping the Ones You've Got, our webinar today from the Tech Marketers Group. And joining me is Valerie Walshe from Xero, Alex McNaughten, who's Chief Revenue Officer and Sales Leader, and also the lovely Emma Elwood, our producer for today. So before we get into things, you'll notice that we have a panelist missing. So Julia Jack sends her sincere apologies. Unfortunately, she's had something come up that has prevented her from joining us at the very last minute. So we'll have a great time with Alex and Valerie. And the upside of that is, of course, we get to hear a lot more from them than we would have otherwise. Before we get into it, this is a very informal session. More of a chat than a panel challenge, nothing like the debate that's going to be happening on the weekend in the US. So there'll be no microphone muting, but we do actually encourage audience participation. So as we go, if you can throw any comments, thoughts, reflections in chat, that would be awesome. And also if you've got questions for Valerie and Alex as we go, if you could just pop those into Q&A. And unlike many other sessions, we'll be doing our best to answer your questions as we go, just to try and keep it relevant and interesting as we can. The reason we're talking about this today, of course, is that it is a very hot topic, unfortunately, and one that is getting increasingly relevant for a number of us in the tech sector. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask Alex, if you could just give your reflections on the changes that you've seen in recent months and how you're interpreting that.
Oh, thanks, Jane, and hey everyone who's on the webinar. Just a little bit of quick background about me. So yeah, I run a business called Sales Leaders, and I've worked with about 70 companies over the last 2 years who sell B2B, and I work with them to help reduce the risk of missing out on revenue opportunities through sales advisory, training, and virtual sales leadership services. And yeah, really good question, Jane. Obviously, there has been a fair few changes and impacts to churn and customer retention this year. I don't think we need to go into sort of too much detail about why that is. But, you know, obviously a lot of companies have seen that there's been challenges with customer retention or increases in churn. And I think part of the reason is business owners and execs have been in this frame of mind where they're far more risk averse and cost conscious. So they're quite critically evaluating what do we actually need to keep using and what can we get rid of in terms of looking at suppliers and so on. So, you know, one of the things that we looked at across all my clients was how do we position ourselves to make sure that we're a need to have, not a nice to have, to try and reduce the risk of being churned.
And Valerie, if you could just give us a little quick intro about yourself and what you're seeing from more of a marketing perspective from Xero.
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Valerie Walshe. I'm the Director of Brand and Marketing at Xero. I'm going to feel a little bit old when I say this, but I think I've got about 20 years of marketing experience and kind of B2B and B2C space now. I think I should change that to like 15 years plus maybe going forward, just to make it feel hip and relevant. What are we seeing from a perspective, from a churn perspective and retaining customers? For us, I think it's never been more important for small businesses who are our main focus to know their numbers. And, you know, it's never until you have that absolutely, you know, critical need to know your numbers that you really know that you need to know your numbers backwards and forwards. So it's been a really key time for our customers and for small businesses, I think, across New Zealand and across the world. So having access to really up-to-date information, being able to look forward, see how things are going, you know, when invoices are going to get paid, etc., absolutely critical. So it's been a really positive time to be able to support small businesses to get access to that information. And I think, you know, during times such as that, it's been really important for us to kind of keep a strong presence here and to keep talking to our existing customers as well, just to, you know, maintain those relationships and really help them through this difficult time. So yeah, it's been a good time to be a cloud accounting software company, if you like. You know, it's been so important to know your numbers, so important to be able to access those numbers from anywhere as well. I think that's the point that's been really rammed home for everyone during the last few months.
So a good mix of being relevant, as Alex was saying, and also keeping in front of your customers so that you are actually front of mind. On that, what are the kind of metrics and signals that you are monitoring around, or do you believe others should be monitoring around what would tell you that you've got a customer churn issue or customer retention issue? Valerie, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah. So we're a very numbers-based company. We're looking at the numbers all the time. So, there's a number of metrics we're monitoring. So obviously churn, we're looking at NPS on a very regular basis. We're delving into what are the specific comments people are making. We get a lot of fantastic feedback and great ideas from that. So we're also looking at some of the more headlights, I guess. So just watching, new trials and visits to the websites, the type of questions that we're being asked, in Xero Central, which is like our support and education area. So all of those metrics we're monitoring on a daily basis, just to keep tracking, get that early headlights into both, positive trends or concerning trends that we need to address.
Okay. Alex, what do you recommend to your customers that they monitor from a churn perspective?
Yeah, I'd agree with Valerie on all those ones. I think some of the ones that I'd probably add to that list would be look at payment issues. So if you've got accounts that are either late on payment or not paying, and that's often that's often a bad sign. It's a red flag. Also decrease in usage. So if someone is suddenly not using your software as regularly, that can be quite a bad sign. And probably the third, rising complaints would be another one, and then also lack of responsiveness. So if you're trying to reach out to them for something and they're not responding, that can be quite a bad sign too.
Yeah, I think really interesting, just to build on that, Alex, that payments one's a really interesting one, because even people perhaps querying the nature of your fees a little bit more than perhaps you've seen in the past, I think is a really, can be a early alert signal that perhaps they're not feeling that value piece.
That's right. And I think particularly at the moment where people are more cost conscious, what that can often signal is they're shopping around. It can signal that your competitor is running a aggressive pricing strategy at the moment, and your customers are seeing that and then asking you, hey, why is our price, 20% more than the competitors out there? So sometimes a way you can kind of preempt that is if you just look at or, watch closely what your competitors are doing from a pricing perspective, so you can head those conversations off, or at least be aware of them.
It's sounding as though we need to get a bit closer to the accounts department than potentially we have been.
Yeah, look, I think broadly in business, departments, and this is going to be a general statement, but don't talk to each other as much as they probably should. The classic one, I think we were going to talk about this later, is the classic kind of sales and marketing divide. But the same thing happens with product, the same thing happens with accounts. And I think it is definitely really important that everyone's on the same page and is not too precious with data, and that data is flowing freely throughout the whole organization, because ultimately we're all in it for the same thing, which is, growing a business.
Do you have any insights on that, Valerie, given how data-driven that Xero is?
Yeah, I certainly know as a marketer, I try and stay very close friends with the finance department, the legal department, and procurement. They're all very important people to keep very close, in addition to obviously sales and product, as Alex mentioned. So I think, that is really key, to be working really closely together so that you've got, that you're not working sort of standalone and thinking that everything's fine when perhaps there's some other signals emerging in other places that could give you a bit of a heads up.
I think probably Xero is like a really good example of how to do it. And a lot of, smaller, more, aspirational companies would probably take on some of those lessons and try and emulate that, even if they're a lot smaller right now, but try and emulate a lot of that kind of data-driven approach and collaboration.
That's all very good points for us to take on board. and particularly companies that don't have a lot of insight at the moment around numbers, pulling that together is probably the number one thing that they potentially should be looking at doing in order to at least identify, do they have a problem or not. One of the interesting conversations we had in preparing for this was around the difference between churn and retention. And it just suddenly occurred to me that that's probably a really good thing for us just to bring to the surface now. And Alex, I know you are quite passionate about that, basically there is quite a big difference between losing your customers and holding on to them, so what you monitor and what you manage.
Yeah, well, obviously you want to hang on to as many as you can. That's just obvious. Churn is the enemy, especially for a lot of companies who are trying to scale up, and they're trying to scale up too fast, and then what they suddenly see is their churn goes up because they haven't got the processes and approaches in place in terms of customer success and the systems to actually keep their customers. So yeah, look, it's super crucial that whether you're a 5-person company or a 500-person company, that you are doing whatever, absolutely everything you can to maximize customer retention and minimize churn.
So that's probably a good lead in, Valerie, too. What would you see as being the top 2 or 3 things that a tech company should be doing at the moment to both halt churn and maximize retention?
I'm just going to go on about one, I think, which is going to be a bit controversial. Value. I just think it's so important to demonstrate value and really drive utilization of your product or service. So when I think about the Xero example, we do a lot of work with both small businesses and with accountants and bookkeepers, who are an amazing support for small businesses to really try and deliver that value. And we try and deliver it in a whole lot of different ways. So obviously one way that customers get value out of a solution such as we offer is to get, be utilizing it to its fullest, having full access to all the numbers, etc. And so a lot of that comes down to education sometimes. So we historically have done a lot of face-to-face education, but also do a lot of online education, obviously. And just, it's amazing the difference we can actually make to people's lives. It sounds really silly when you're talking about accounting software, but to actually help people to save some time that's going to cause them less stress. Often it's around the dining room table, back in the family home, where they might be chasing up people who owe them money, or trying to get the invoices out for the month or whatever. And if we can actually show them how it can be done in a simpler way, it can save them hours of time, and that can just make such a big difference, not just to their business, but to their family, or however they want to spend that time. Nonetheless, in terms of being able to help them get paid faster or have better cash flow, etc. So, we've had people, you present or show people how to do something in the system, and they'll be hugging you and there'll be tears, and you're like, oh my God, I've just shown you like how to do something simple, but it's just made such a big difference to their lives. And it's that sort of value that I think is really important. And so we do it from an education perspective, but we also try and look at things. So we introduced probably just over a year ago now, something called the Xero Assistance Program. So this is where we basically offer the counselling, the EAP services that we have access to as Xero employees, that we actually offer that to our customers as well, so they can access counselling, because small businesses is one of the toughest jobs in the world, right? Like your head of HR, your head of operations, your head of IT, your head of sales, and you're often a one-person band. So we provided value in terms of extra support for them to just, if they need it, that they have access to the resources that, big companies can have. And if we can improve mental wellness, mental well-being, that will help productivity. And, that's got to be good for them as a small business, but for New Zealand overall as well. So, trying to show value in those sort of ways. And then with our accountants and bookkeepers, who I mentioned is such an amazing resource for small businesses that we work with, we try and deliver extra value to them in terms of giving them the resources to make it easy for them to work with their clients as well, be it, once again, education, or even just email templates that they can use, showing them how, ways that they could potentially grow their business, a whole variety of different things. So it's just that value piece is so important, I think, in demonstrating that, because if people are getting value out of whatever your product or service is, then they're not going to churn. They are going to be a great advocate for you. So just keep, that value piece, I just think it's critical. Have I said value enough?
We value your answer. What I'm hearing though is these are things that aren't actually sitting in the product. What you're looking at is adding value over and above what you're offering actually in the product. So that was around the education piece, around tools to help use the product more effectively, but also that more personal engagement at a social level. Yeah. Is there anything that you've significantly changed or done differently over the last 6 months that others might also be able to pick up and adopt?
And it helps that we do have a beautiful product as well, just kind of going on top of that. I think we've just done more of what we've always historically done. So, when COVID first hit, we accelerated some product pieces to really help small businesses. So, for example, we'd been piloting a short-term cash flow offering, and we rolled that out so that just a reporting tool that would really help small businesses get, have much greater visibility again of their cash flow. So we did a quick app that enabled people to get their loan documentation together, just to make it easier to get access to funding in terms of bank loans, etc. So that was something that we made, we accelerated and brought to market just to kind of help small businesses in those ways. So they were, we accelerated some of that type of work, but just, we've always done education, trying to add that value. We just accelerated it. So we were doing, we traditionally do, webinars and videos about how to get the most out of the product. But suddenly we were, spinning up new webinars on how to make sure, how you could access the wage subsidy with Xero, and, so things that were happening and that people needed access to. So we were updating content on a daily, if not hourly basis at sometimes during the last few months, just to really help support our accountants and bookkeepers and small business clients. So it was just more of the same, but accelerating it, doing it a lot faster, just trying to get it out there more often.
And by the sounds, standing in your customer's shoes and looking at what are the issues they're facing at the moment and how could you more immediately help them solve those, which I think a lot of us are sitting there looking at the moment. Alex, with all the companies that you're working across, what are you seeing as some of the key things that you can do to actually improve the retention factor?
Yeah, and I'll just address something quickly on what Valerie was saying there. I think value is huge, but what some smaller companies who might be listening to this might be thinking is, oh, we don't have Xero's marketing engine. We can't be doing content every hour. Okay. And I think, it doesn't have to be that much, and you can be very smart about it and repurpose your content and use it across multiple things. So you can create something for existing customers, but then you can then repurpose that and use that as a piece of sales collateral, or repurpose that and use that for your customer success team, or whatever, So I think that's just a point to remember if you're not a Xero. In terms of what what I've seen across the companies I've worked with, probably similar to that. I think empathy is really important at the moment. I've seen a lot of tone deaf approaches in the market, and then, which can hurt a company. So I think empathy is really important. And a couple of examples of that is even just with like simple things with messaging is like less I and me in your messaging and more you, and speak to your customer, not at them. And then you look, I'll just reinforce what Valerie was saying there around value is, add value outside of your product, even if it's as simple as, hey, I read this cool article and thought this might be interesting for you. That's value. It doesn't have to be grand gestures, but just little bits of value. If you can, and this actually happened recently with a client where, their software was on the chopping block against another piece of software. But because my client had for the last 6 months been really consistently providing value above and beyond what they were doing from a from a pure solution perspective versus this other piece of software who'd basically been a ghost. Even though my client software was far more expensive and arguably less mission critical, they stuck with them because they were just there. They were there in front of that client, always adding value, proactive, not just always responsive. So yeah, that's, I think that's a really good takeaway.
Right. Em, it looks like we have a question.
Me, I've popped up. I'm the question gnome. I'm just in and out. Yeah, you're right, Alex. Good guy always wins in the end, doesn't it? We've got a couple of questions here from our attendees. The first one's from Michael, just going back to the churn conversation. So if you're talking to a leadership team about keeping customers, should you focus on the retention or churn metric?
Do you want to take that one first, Valerie?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. I think it's also about what you're wanting to achieve, right? So, and I think picking up on some of Alex's points in terms of, being something that's relevant for small businesses, I just think your existing customers are such a great source of, obviously the current revenue that you have with them, potential revenue if there's an opportunity to cross-sell other products or services. Obviously, if you're doing a great job, they can be a great referral source for you in terms of, recommending other potential clients to your business. So I do think that, looking after your current customers is such an important piece because it offers so many opportunities for you from that. And, we do a lot of education and training too, and kind of like, with our accountants and bookkeepers about how to grow your practice, or with small businesses, how to grow your business. And, we always start with your existing customers are this amazing opportunity that, you shouldn't ever take for granted. And just, it's such a rich, fertile ground and so important to look after. So I think, that's a great source if you're talking about growth, maybe with your leadership team. Obviously, if you are experiencing some churn, that's something, we need to bring to the fore and, make sure that people are aware of too, that it's, it's something as we talked about before, it can often be a cross-functional need to work together to kind of address some of those problems if you are experiencing some churn challenges. But yeah, and I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve, how you would bring that up to, which metric is more important with your leadership team.
Alex, any insight?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what the goal is and what the specific situation is. But I think broadly, you probably want to look at a churn metric, but then also look at some sort of like revenue expansion metric to see how, are your existing accounts growing, or are they flat, or are they decreasing? And you want to be looking at the actual dollars, not just the pure churn number, because, and one way to look at it, and I know every single customer is important, but if you're churning really small, low value customers, but your bigger valuable customers are all growing, then that's not necessarily such a bad place to be. And if you just looked at a pure numbers of clients churned metric, it might look really bad. So probably I'd take it back to looking at some revenue numbers and looking at it from that perspective.
And Helen Shorthouse has just thrown in a reminder to us all that it does cost something like 5 times more to bring on a new customer than to keep an existing one. So, what I'm hearing is that we should be looking holistically at this whole problem, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to retain is business value and that profit margin, and how we retain that. It's kind of immaterial at the moment in terms of, the focus is on keeping as many customers we can, growing the existing customer pool we've got, bringing on new customers if we can, and trying not to lose, too many out the bottom. But this sort of leads into, though, is sort of an interesting question that got raised around, from what Michael was asking. Where should we be putting our energy and effort? Is it in that top 20% of customers that are generating most of our revenue, or trying to keep that long tail of where the bulk of our customers sit, but they're not generating potentially that much revenue? There is definitely a a way up there. Do you have an insight on that, Alex?
Yeah, I'd look at it. Well, it depends on your solution, firstly, and kind of how you're priced. Are you a high value or a low value solution? I think is probably where you'd start, and that would depend, that would affect how you'd approach it. But you'd also probably want to look at the potential revenues from future revenues from your account. So they might be small today, but is that an account that could one day become a whale? So I think you probably want to look at your accounts not just as a pure small versus big, but actually look at them from a revenue potential perspective too. Again, every customer is important and churn's the enemy, but if you've got some really low value clients who are always going to be really low value clients, I certainly wouldn't be putting the same effort into them than I would be maybe some low value clients who have the potential to be very high value clients one day. So I think getting really good intelligence about your accounts is crucial. And if you're a high value solution, say more than 10K a year kind of solution, then you want to be talking to them, like actually talking to them, in my view, at least probably 3-4 times a year. And if you're on the lower value end, you can automate that, but basically then it's a data thing. So then it's all about having really good data on your accounts. Does that answer the question, Jane?
So. It's always it's like it depends. I mean, and you're right, high value versus is where you've got a low cost of sale and a high volume of sale. It's very different to where you've got very few high price sales in the course of a year. So yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach for sure. Em, I noticed that we do have some more questions.
Guys, the questions are popping off. You need to calm down.
Right. Well, why don't you just take it off and can you throw one at Valerie perhaps?
Valerie,
nice one.
You're going to catch this one?
Nice.
From John, he's asked too, he's keen. The first one was, data insight often comes down to the quality of the data and the value the business places on it. Do you see marketing data challenges as systematic or culture-based, or both?
Oh, that's a good
question.
Good question, John.
It's a cardio workout for the brain, this one, John.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, there's got to be that desire for the good data, obviously. So I think there is that. There's got to be the company commitment to it, if you like, and that having that data-driven focus. So I definitely think there's some cultural elements there. I know too, obviously for some smaller companies, it can be difficult, so you may have the absolute desire, but perhaps not the resources or, in the process of kind of building that data. But it is amazing with the democratization of so many tools and systems now. There's any size business can get access to a variety of tools to help, really drill into the data side of things. So I think, there's always more you can be doing there. But yeah, I do think you need that cultural focus on it, right? And that the decisions are being made on the data, and that, that there is that desire to drill in more and I guess make the best decisions you can with the data available, but really interrogating that data very carefully. And, if it's a big strategic decision, does that require, more time, more data, more research, whatever's needed to kind of help support that? So I'm not quite sure if I've answered that question very well, but I do think you've got to have that cultural desire.
Yeah. No excuse for wishy-washy decisions anymore. We live in a world of numbers, don't we? We've got the access. Another one from John. There's a lot of talk about retention tactics and customer experience engagement, but how large a part do you feel reputation plays in customer decision-making in the current context? Alex?
I think you could get hung up on it probably a bit too much, because ultimately, if you're providing value and you're communicating how you're providing value to the market, I don't think, you don't have to be the biggest, most well-known company to succeed. To give some context, most of the clients I work with are kind of sub 10 million in revenues. And none of them, we're not allowing the fact that they are startups or early stage companies affect them winning big clients. You know, like I've had clients win banks, government agencies, New Zealand's largest marketplace, all this year. And these are companies with very little brand clout, so to speak. So I think the same applies from a retention perspective. You know, if you're adding value, communicating value, proactive and looking after your clients, just because you don't necessarily have the most well-known brand in the world, I wouldn't look at that as a risk. That would be the last thing I'd look at.
Mm. Cool.
Any more for now, Em, or are we?
Let's keep going, and
Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Just one little insight from me on the data piece was around, I just sort of see people going, we're going to start tracking data, and there's like 400 line items of things that all of a sudden start getting tracked. Mm-hmm. It's just really, you know, some of the key things that Valerie and Alex have talked about today, those are the very key things that you should be tracking, and it's better to track those 3 or 4 things really well than try and have this massive amount of data lines that you're trying to follow, and because it just gets or can get very confusing. And to your point, Michael, you know, if the quality of the data isn't there, then, you know, you can end up making not so good decisions as well off the back of that. So having a few things that, to me, a few things that you're tracking that you can know that you've got good data for is actually better than a whole lot.
Yeah,
and that's
just to add to that, like we, yeah, I think it's an old sales mantra or something, you know, like what gets measured gets done, you know, like, you know, makes really clear what the priorities are. You know, and yeah, absolutely agree with it. Just a couple of things, and just having those really clear headlights and being, you know, absolutely obsessive about it, I think really important.
Which is probably a good segue into the, almost like the flip side of that, which is, you know, we've sort of touched on it, but where does customer advocacy and community building and brand play in all of this, Valerie? Where do you see that piece of the marketing puzzle falling into place?
I think I've talked about it a little bit already, but I think customer advocacy is such an amazing tool. You know, if your customers, regardless of whether you're big or small, are saying good things about you, and they can say good things about you at a barbecue, or if someone asks them directly, or on social media, or wherever, that is such a powerful tool. And oh, I've gone light, my lights. I just think it's such a powerful tool, you know, regardless of the size of your business. If your customers are your fans and are, you know, happy to say that to other people, that is an amazing resource that any size business can access, right? And so it's, you know, understanding whether you have that customer advocacy or not is a key data point, because if you don't know if you have it, if you're not tracking it, you can't see if it's going up or down, and it's not something you can then address. So that's something else that we often, you know, in the education we do, we ask people who's tracking their advocacy, who's tracking their NPS, and, you know, you often get, you know, sort of 3 hands going up in a room full of 30, and you've got, it doesn't have to be expensive, it's not hard, it's just 1 or 2 questions. It would be, you know, you can do it manually, you can do it automated, but you should do it and then be prepared to do something about the answers that you get. So huge, I just think customer advocacy, it's such an amazing tool. It's free, you know, you should be tracking it, accessing it, it's amazing. And then that community piece, once again, I think the power of community. We have some amazing, you know, social media groups within Xero. So we have groups of bookkeepers who are together in Facebook, and accountancy groups, etc., on LinkedIn, and the amazing insights and feedback, and sometimes you know, it's not always positive. It's, you know, sometimes it's you know, they tell it like it is, and it's a very powerful community. They support each other. You know, they give great advice to each other. They help each other out. Once again, I think it's a great thing that's open to all businesses, big or small. You can do it online, you can do it face to face, and bringing that community together, and the power of that community is phenomenal.
Alex, do you have any insight add to that?
Just kind of, it's like a side note. So I often find Kiwi companies are a little bit shy about telling the good stories, and don't tell their good customer stories enough, and don't focus on, building that collateral enough. So I think that would probably just be one of the biggest bits of advice, particularly for all companies, but particularly smaller companies, is, don't be afraid to share the good stories and the good wins, and, get your customers involved in, doing a video case study, and do lots of them. It's an amazing collateral. And, make it easy for, things like referrals as well. Like if you want your customers to be bringing you new customers, make it really easy for them to do so. Because those are going to be some of the easiest wins you'll get if they're coming from one of your kind of customer advocates out there in the market.
Yeah, it's also too, I've seen companies that are scared to even go out with the NPS question.
Yeah.
It's like, what if particularly doing it for the first time, going, well, what if our customers don't like us? What if they tell us, that we're not all that great?
But better to know, because at least then you can improve. I'd rather get a 5 out of 10 and know how I can, and to get some suggestions to get to an 8 out of 10, than have a bunch of customers who are kind of like moderately happy, or dissatisfied even. So, I can understand that fear, but short answer is get over it, because, you need to know what your customers are thinking about you, so that you can keep improving. Otherwise, someone else will.
I also think that if you do have a situation where someone's unhappy and you can actually engage with them and turn it around, they can actually become your biggest advocate, because they've kind of had that, they've had a negative experience or something's happened. But if you've actually listened and been able to solve it in some way, or even sometimes just listening is half the battle, I think, they can just turn into your biggest advocate. And, but if you don't know, as Alex said, the first time you might know is that they've just stopped paying their bill, right? Like it's, and that's a pretty crappy time to find out.
Yeah. So the interesting question just come through on chat around personalization, and how important do you believe it is for personalization and content? Is it something that we should be doing or doing more of at this time? Or is it a step too far?
I would say so, that it's something you should always be doing, but probably now more than ever. And personalization doesn't have to necessarily be at an individual level. It could be at, at an industry level, or at like a persona level. That's often what I'm advising clients to do from a case study perspective, is kind of build a library of case studies, and then have, this library speaks to persona A, this library speaks to persona B. And you do that the same with any kind of marketing messaging collateral, because customers, they want to feel like you understand them. And if you're speaking to them all as one group, then they're not going to feel understood, because they're not one group. There'll be all sorts of personas in your customer base.
Yeah. What are some of the other things you're seeing, Valerie, around the content piece? Because I know you create a lot of content.
Yeah, we do. And just to follow on from Alex's comments, I think on that personalization piece too, once again, the data, being able to track, like, are people opening whatever you're sending them? What are they clicking on? Are they engaging with it? Really tracking that, looking at your unsubscribes, etc. Once again, we do, a lot of education with small businesses, and a lot of them, in your companies might be doing this too. You're sending out newsletters or whatever and going, yep, there's the monthly newsletter gone, woohoo, tick, moving on to the next thing. But nobody's actually looking, is anyone reading the newsletter? Does anyone like the newsletter? Like, what are they reading within it? You might be doing all this work to send out something that perhaps nobody actually cares that much about. So I think, great opportunity with personalization, and just if you can make it more relevant, more engaging by learning, constantly just looking at the data and learning and seeing what's resonating with people. I think that's a really good thing, because then you can keep on just improving, and the potential to segment in all sorts of different ways. I think just to increase that relevance and engagement is really key. In terms of types of content, we are delivering content in a whole lot of different ways. Not so much face-to-face at the moment, but just starting to get, we're back at, I think we're at Bookkeeping Con in November, and we were at a wellness conference in Hawke's Bay earlier this month. So we're just starting to get back out into some face-to-face events, but a lot of webinar activity, obviously videos, infographics, blogs, like you name it. We're trying to deliver content in whatever way will work best for people. Some people love, they'll read an article, or they'll read information about how to help them do something. Other people would prefer to watch a short video. We've just released a whole series of what we're calling Xero First. So they're little short videos, like little 3-minute videos, where you can watch like how to set up your first invoice or whatever, set to wonderfully funky music. Just so it's really bite-sized, so you can just drill right into the particular thing that you might need help with, watch that video, you're all good to go. So we try and provide that content and support in a number of different ways so that you can access it in the way that's best for you.
Do you star in any of those videos, Valerie?
No, it's all those particular ones that I'm mentioning are all very product-based. But we did have Xero on air recently, which was a sort of a virtual product announcement conference a couple of weeks ago. So that was the first time we'd done that, which was like a global, very, once again, short videos, somewhere between sort of 5 to 15 minutes that a number of our team and some external speakers featured in. And that was great. That was a first for us to kind of try that approach, where traditionally we would have had a XeroCon, which is like the Coachella for accountants and bookkeepers. Instead, we had to go to a video format. So, yeah.
Nice.
Have we got any more questions?
Do we have any more questions? Yep. We might have to answer some of these offline after the webinar, but I'll get on to another one. We've got Mr. Pinchin on the call. Hello, sir. The role of marketing is often seen as simply generating leads. Can you give any advice to marketers to give them the ammunition to sell the importance of marketing's role to those up the food chain when it comes to customer retention?
Good question, Bob.
I think my 2 cents on that one is know your numbers really well and tie your numbers beyond, I think sometimes marketing gets that view is because they're only talking about, for example, open rates, or they're only talking about lead gen. But if you start actually talking about revenues, or start talking about customer retention, and actually talk about the metrics that you want to be known for, and have those conversations, I think that'll help.
That's good advice.
Have you seen that, Valerie? Do you?
Yeah, agree. So NPS, I think that's a key one for marketing to be talking about, and certainly opens up wider conversations in terms of that whole customer engagement piece. Opens up, input into product, etc. So yeah, I think it's really important to be clear on those metrics. I think 100% agree with Alex in terms of knowing your numbers and being confident with those numbers, and being clear on the commercial impact is really important.
Nice.
The other thing you could also do is ask, if you're being pigeonholed in that respect, is ask your team why they have that opinion, like what is giving them that opinion about you and your team, and you'll actually find out, and they'll tell you how you can, secret of selling or anything, whether we're trying to sell something internally or externally, is just ask a bunch of questions and just figure out, okay, what is it about what you're doing right now that is giving you that perspective, that view, and and then just follow that up with, well, what do you want to see to help us get more budget to do this, this, and this?
It's probably a good lead into to one of the questions we had thought of, which was around how sales and marketing probably should be working together at this time on these kinds of issues. Do you want to lead off on that, Alex?
Sure. Look, there is a bit of a there seems to be a bit of a divide between sales and marketing. I think often sales teams think, blame marketing for bad leads. Marketing blame sales for not converting is just one really simple example. And I had this yesterday with a client where, the sales team is saying, oh, we don't have enough leads. And the marketing team's like, yeah, but you're not closing any of the ones we're giving you. And what it came down to was that for about 12 months, the same kinds of objections kept coming up in sales. And marketing and product had all the responses and information and stories that they could have armed sales with. But because sales wasn't feeding back into marketing and marketing actually wasn't talking to sales very well, there's nothing had been done.
Practically, how do we solve this? How do we?
So practically, I'm getting there. So practically, look, how do we solve this? Well, look, I think first things first, we need to realize that we're on the same page. Like, we've all got the same goal, which is grow the company. And sales and marketing are two sides of the same coin in a lot of respects. Second thing, regular communication. So, and that's not just sales leader and marketing leader meeting up once a month for a coffee. It's actually at a team level is what I'd encourage, is actually get salespeople and marketing people to talk more, and encourage sales teams to feed back into marketing what they're seeing on the front line, and equally marketing to continually arm sales with the right tools, so that they can be more effective. And maybe the third thing is, especially for bigger companies, is create like a feedback, shared comms kind of mechanism where sales and marketing can easily, for example, sales in that example that I just gave with my client that I've just started working with, is that could have easily been solved if sales had just dropped in a Slack channel, for example. Hey, do you have any content for this kind of objection that I keep seeing? And I know it seems so blatantly obvious, but unless we create that mechanism for our teams, it won't get done.
Point. Is this something that you've seen over the years, Valerie? Not necessarily at Xero, but is this
it's the perennial issue, isn't it? Like, this one always comes up. It's I think that it sounds really simple, but the communication piece is really important. It is like daily/hourly communication, and at all levels of the sales and marketing teams too, not just at the leaders, but throughout both teams, because I often find that that's a really good informal feedback loop. Like, you often hear something that you may not have heard, at kind of the top of the tree, but people are feeding it at the bottom of the tree, which you can then do something about. So I think really important to have that communication across all parts of the organization in terms of sales and marketing. I think we are very similar. Sometimes our problem is actually we are too much the same. We're like brother and sister, right? We kind of fight a bit sometimes. But I think we get good, where we have the most impact is where we're both clear on what the goal is, whatever that might be. We're working, pooling the resources to achieve that common aim. And I mean, that's nirvana, and when it's happening and when it's not. So you got to, constantly kind of be refining to get back to that. So it's there's always a little bit of tension. Sometimes a little bit of tension is a good thing. From tension can come diamonds, right? So, but yeah, I just think it's communication, and it's every day, and all areas of the team.
Sales and marketing should just make each other look good.
Exactly.
It's that simple, If sales are performing at a high level, marketing has a better return on ad spend. If marketing's performing and optimized, then sales has more leads to go work, So work together, make each other look good.
Sounds so
I guess if it's...
Sorry, you go, Jane.
I was just to say, if it's not happening at the moment, maybe the current situation and the focus on customer retention and trying to hold on to the customers you've got and grow the customer pool is a really good reason to say, to your sales team, hey, look, we really should get together on this, and use it as an incentive to create those conversations, rather than, there is a compelling event that we can, start getting together a lot more around. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's okay. I was about to say something totally inappropriate.
Well, I saved you.
What you were saying, it reminded me of an article I was reading in the paper this morning about Black Power and the Mongrel Mob coming together to work as a team. Okay.
Yeah, it may not be the right parallel, but a close one.
Made me laugh.
So just conscious of time.
Yeah.
Do you want to pop in one more question, and then I'll just get Alex and Valerie to wrap with if there was one thing we should be doing, what it is.
Yes, for sure. I'll just ask the first one that was on the list from Bridie. Oh no, that was more of a comment than a question. We'll go to Michael. If you're a small business, what are some simple practical steps to start tracking NPS and sharing the results to drive change?
Valerie, do you want to?
Yeah. Ask your customers, would they, and there's some great tools out there. Ask nicely, that doesn't have to be expensive. As I say, you can even, I've seen a great, that, you've all seen them at airports with the emoticons and stuff, how was your experience? You can put simple things at the bottom of, if you are sending out that regular newsletter, you can put a little thing at the bottom of the newsletter to get feedback. Ask people when you're meeting, ask clients when you're meeting with them if that's the way you operate, actually have that conversation. It can be done in a whole lot of different ways. So just ask. So step one would be to ask and collect that data. And then step two is, but be prepared to do something about it. So don't collect the data and then not look at it, and look at it as a leadership team, so don't just look at it just like in marketing, kind of hide it away and go, oh, I know something that you don't know, talk about it with the cross-functional team, look at the verbatim comments. If you're getting some detractors, have some of your senior leadership pick up the phone or go and visit them, whatever's appropriate, and actually ask more questions and find out more. You might be, I'm always amazed what people will tell you when you actually ask the questions. So I think, step one is asking a question. Step two is being prepared to do something about it. And that's, some of your leaders may be a bit nervous about maybe picking up the phone, but I tell you that if they can potentially turn that customer around and have a real advocate for life by just, listening.
And sometimes not even just turn it around. Like sometimes if there's a problem, it's a really good opportunity just to have a conversation, and it can turn into an additional sale, an upsell or a cross sell. Because sometimes the reason they're happy is they didn't get everything they needed to the first time round when they spoke to you. And maybe there's an opportunity to sell them something else that might make them happier too. I wouldn't recommend doing that all in one go, but that can also be the result. I've seen that happen a lot.
So to wrap, it's been an exciting sort of 55 minutes so far. Valerie, if there was one thing, if you were advising another tech marketing company, what is the one thing that you think they should be doing at the moment to retain customers?
I think you might know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say show value, deliver value. That is the most important thing you can do. And as I mentioned, that can be in a whole lot of different ways. But I just think prove that value, and then you won't have a problem with churn.
So it's value from Valerie. Alex.
Well, look, that's probably number one. But I'd say, like any good relationship, communication is key. So be proactive, not reactive with customers. Always be talking to them, and yes, absolutely, always be adding value too.
Awesome place to finish. But for the last word, there was a really nice summary in our chat from Wynand. So I'd just like to say that they shared, so if I understand this right, the process for growth is to get data, analyze, work on reducing churn by providing value, and then go out and get new customers based on those great customer stories you've just created.
Pretty good wrap up.
So that's a pretty good wrap. So thank you everyone for hanging in with us for this hour. We will be providing a summary of the key points from the webinar. So hopefully if you haven't taken notes, don't despair. We will provide you with some. We've really enjoyed talking with you, Alex and Valerie. Thank you very much for your time. It's been really valuable. And thank you, Em, for excellent producing and question answering. And the next one coming up, everybody, is November. Em, do you want to give us the...
It's about the privacy, how the new privacy laws coming into act and how that will affect marketing. So we've got someone coming and talking about that, which will be great.
Real subject matter expert. So